we are. Crissy grew up in Southern California. Her writing has appeared in Vice, Bustle, Guernica, and Catapult. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the New School. She teaches creative writing at the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College. She's the founder of the literary project 5 Quarterly and the managing editor for Novella Books. She serves on the board of directors for the literary nonprofit Novelly. Her debut novel, Creatures, is now out in paperback. Hey. Please welcome Crissy Van Meter. And then Michelle Gallen was born in County Tyrone in the mid-1970s and grew up during the Troubles a few miles from the border between what she was told was the Free State and the United Kingdom. She studied English literature at Trinity College, Dublin, and won several prestigious awards as a young writer. Following a devastating brain injury in her mid-20s, she co-founded 3 award-winning companies and won international recognition for digital innovation. She now lives in Dublin with her husband and kids, and her debut novel, Big Girl, Small Town, was also one of Green Apple's Apple Month selections most recently. So hopefully if you're joining us, you received that in the mail. And it is also the reason that we are here today. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Gallen.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Crissy, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm really glad we get to keep talking. We had a conversation last week, which didn't feel long enough. So it's kind of nice that we get to keep chatting, I guess.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I love this book so much. I was so lucky to blurb it. I'm lucky we have it here in the States now. This book is so funny and has, I think, one of the best heroines of all the books I've read in a long time. And Magella is just sort of this wonderful girl, woman trying to figure it out, trying to, come up in the crazy times. And I think it's so relevant now, this book, in so many ways. I know it's a lot of stuff we can talk about today, but I wanted to see if you wanted to read something for all of us first.
Sure, I can kick off with the reading. I'm actually annoyed though. I'm in Donegal at the minute instead of being in Dublin. And in Dublin, I have both the hardback copy and the paperback copy of your book, which
really?
I didn't actually read. Yeah, I have both of them. Because what happened was I read it as an ebook, and then I loved the cover so much. I thought I'm just going to order it to get the cover. So then I ordered the hardback, and I got the hardback, and it feels really nice. And then I wanted to order as a gift for somebody, and so now I have 2 copies sitting in Dublin. So I have my hardback for me and my gift copy, and I would be lifting them up and showing them off right now because I loved it so much. It's the book I think about when I'm on. I'm by the sea right now, and it's what I do with my kids every day is we go out and we try and find things. Like, it just doesn't matter what it is. I mean, there is plastic, we find plastic, but we also find sea creatures, and it's such a gorgeous cover.
Yeah, I know. I really, really lucked out with the cover for sure. And I think I just got really lucky. Algonquin, which is both of our publisher. You know how you have to look at the sort of cover ideas they have, and it was just so glaringly obvious. On the table, they had put out 4, and I was almost like they wanted to see my reaction. I was like, "Well, isn't this the obvious choice?" And they're like, "Oh, thank God, yes." And I was like, "Yeah, it's actually it's an Ernst Haeckel painting, so it's part of the sort of it's kind of like an Audubon painting or a nature painting from the 1800s." So it appears kind of other places. I think other people have used specific kind of images of the sea creatures and stuff. Yeah, it's a cool cover.
It's gorgeous. It's so rich. It's so textured. Definitely when I was in lockdown in Dublin and we weren't allowed to go more than 2K or 5K, which means I couldn't reach the beach. It's sat somewhere where I could see it for a long time. It's a really good cover, as well as being a really great book. Sorry, as well. It's not all about the cover. I was like, there's something about it. So anyway, I should probably read then.
Yeah, read.
I'll do this extract. So Big Girl Small Town is set in a chipper, and a chipper is like a fast food place that sells fish and chips mainly, but also things like sausages and burgers and stuff. And mostly everything is deep fat fried. And it's not the sort of place that you can hang out and eat in. You basically go in, make your order, and then you're kicked out again. So Magella, the heroine of this novel, she works in the chipper, and pretty much this novel, the settings kind of bounce between the chipper, Magella's house, and the odd time the pub. But this particular scene is set at 5:05 p.m. and it's on a day where Magella has PMS. So the list item she hates this day happens to be periods, PMS in particular. Magella's hairpins were sticking into her. No matter what she did, she couldn't sort them out. It was fucking her off. She knew by the all over body aches and the itching and scratching feeling she had under her skin that her period was due. Marty was in foul form too, having had a row with Philomena. This was not Magella's problem, and she hoped that Marty would not make it her problem. The buzzer sounded and Red Onions walked into the chipper, his pasty, freckled face streaked with dirt from work. Magella hadn't seen him since he'd found his dad dead on the settee, and she knew she should say something to him. So she paused for what she knew was too long, searching for the right words. Then she spoke. "What can I get you?" Red Onions took a long look at the fluorescent menu board above Magella's head, and then he turned his grey eyes towards her. "A big sausage supper and a can of Coke, please." "Coming up." Magella wrote the order on her wee notebook, ripped the page out, and spiked it onto the board, even though she could tell that Marty had heard the order as it came in and already had the food bubbling in the fryer. Red Onion sat down in the window seat, put his toolbox at his feet, and rested his head in his hands. Magella watched him comb his fingers slowly through his glowing ginger hair. He looked tired. Magella hadn't seen him for a week. She'd taken 6 days off work with no pay for her granny's wake and funeral. And after that, Red Onions had had his dad's wake and funeral to attend to. Magella hated wakes. She'd spent 3 days trapped in her Aunt Marie's house, greeting an unending stream of people who'd come to have a look at the corpse laid out in the only bedroom. It had been a big wake, almost as big as Brendy Hagen's after he'd been blown up by the Loyalists because his photo had been in the paper for distributing shamrocks before Mass and Paddy's Day. Wakes for people killed in explosions usually featured closed coffins, but because the hospital staff did such a great job of patching Brendy back together during the 7 days he'd survived after the explosion, the town had the novelty of a half-open coffin at his wake. Everyone with the faintest connection to the family dropped in for a gawk at Brendy's sewn-up face. Magella had been dragged along by her ma, who'd pushed her into the crowded house. And she'd spent the whole hour in a horror of embarrassment, crammed into close range with neighbours, people from school, strangers. It unnerved Magella to see they'd put Brendy into a full-size coffin, even though he'd lost both his legs. After she'd found a place to stand and had been given a cup of tea, she'd stood there wondering if they'd refrigerated his legs when he'd first been brought into the hospital in case he'd die and could be buried complete, or if they'd incinerated them when it became clear there wasn't enough to sew back on. Magella didn't get wakes. Everyone at her granny's wake had blathered on about the brilliant tradition of wakes and how they were a power of good for the bereaved and how wakes kept the community together and how if it wasn't for wakes and funerals, sure, they'd hardly ever see each other anymore because of the way the telly keeps everyone indoors. The wake didn't feel like a power of good to Magella, who was obliged by tradition to tramp around her Aunt Marie's damp wee house for hours, offering a tray of scones and sandwiches to a load of wet-eyed old fellas who kept telling her what a great dancer her granny had been in her day. Everyone told Magella what she already knew, that no one deserved that end. No one. Hour after hour, Magella carried the tray, and all she could think was, "I'm still at it, still serving food up to the greedy fuckers."
Oh, I love her so much. She's so great. I love also, one thing I was thinking about too that we haven't talked about. I do love the structure of this book, and sort of, I guess in a really simple way of saying this, it's sort of tracked by time and lists and about things she hates, which isn't necessarily just clever, because it's how Magella sort of processes her own life and how her brain works. But I love that structure so much of this book, and the piece you just read, one of my favorite pieces. Just I love her perspective on things, like the legs, like that. I mean, I feel like I would think the same thing. Like, I guess maybe to a normal person that seems morbid, but I think that's a pretty good question of like, why does he have a full casket if he doesn't have
Well,
it?
I mean, it has, yeah. I mean, I've wondered because it's actual experience that, and I would be like, what?
Yeah.
So coffins come and there you go, and we know what happened. So where, like, yeah, no, I don't know if it's a way of disassociating with the actual horror. Do you know what I mean? That if you look at the mechanics of something and you sit down and you say to yourself, well, let's just consider now things that aren't going to make me cry,
Right.
or things that aren't going to, just take the breath out of me. Like, so I wonder, is it a way that you can focus on something? I don't know if you've, I have been in situations where people seem to talk about really banal things or mechanical things at a time of great emotional drama, because it's much easier than dealing with I don't know, you think about the pandemic, a lot of people started making banana bread. Do you know what I mean? There's something about, here is a pandemic and horror that we can't even sort of compute, really, but here are some bananas that are pretty ripe, and what I'm going to do is make banana bread.
It's tangible, it's like a thing that you can, especially like in any kind of feeling disassociated and stuff, right? The first thing you have to do is like recognize what's in front of you. And like, cool thing, I never baked any bread, by the way. That never happened for me whatsoever. But yeah, I think it is certainly something that, that was not for me. But like, one thing, my husband started running a lot and like training for a marathon, and he's certainly athletic, so whatever, that's cool. But like, unless you're chasing me with like a knife, not even a gun, because the gun you could just shoot me, but I'm not going to run, right? So, but for him, it was like this way of processing something that's so heavy, in kind of a literal way. And Magella's, we were just kind of talking about this too, but Magella's dad is just missing. And how do you, I mean, the idea of someone just being gone, right? Like, I get stressed out about like a shirt I'll see myself in a picture of, and I'm like, where did that go? Like, it's just gone. It's like almost like an anxious feeling. Now imagine Magella as this person who has to get up and go to work every day, deal with her like crazy family, mother, her granny's tragedy, all of these things too. And like, meanwhile, in the back of her brain, perhaps the real thing that's, the most troubling is that, he's gone. Where has he gone? I mean, I think a lot of even the structure of the book and the literal sense she takes about things is certainly a lot about processing, the unknown and grief, for sure.
There's an episode of Dallas that Magella's obsessed with Dallas, right? She loves it. But there's an episode of Dallas where Miss Ellie, when Jock goes missing, you probably don't, I know Dallas. But
I did watch
Jock's,
Dallas, actually.
Yeah, you could not watch it in Ireland. There wasn't much choice, but Dallas was on and everybody was addicted. Like, I really thought America was like Dallas. I was quite young when it was out. But there's like this episode where Miss Ellie takes what Magella calls like a head stagger, and she just basically, like, Miss Ellie was always like, I didn't actually like Miss Ellie when I was a kid, because she was too angelic. Like, she didn't seem to have enough feelings, or she had a really good line in looking wounded, but she didn't actually do anything. And then there's this episode where she takes a head stagger and basically smashes up like the dining room or something, and it's because she has no body. She knows Jock is gone, but she can't grieve. She can't sort of process it. And that's an episode that Magella watches. And Magella has never done a Miss Ellie. Like, Magella is biddable. Like, she gets up, she goes to work, she's not late, the chips never burn, she never freaks out, she sits through that god awful wake and just puts up with everything. But she doesn't quite get to the stage where she actually can't even process the anger part of it. When a girl I went to school with disappeared when she was 15, and she went to a disco on the other side of the border and she never came home. And everybody knew who was responsible for her disappearance. But the way things were at the time, we had like the police on one side of the border and the police on the other side of the border, and it's really wild country outside, like where she disappeared. But I often think of that because my dad was, you know, headmaster in the school at the time. I went to school with her from primary school the whole way up, and this idea that somebody just disappears, that it's like even when our cat disappeared when I was a kid.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
even your cat, you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
So it's a great kind of hole. And I know in your book, the Evie's husband, or not husband to be, her fiance's not quite missing at sea, but nobody's heard from him. And I think it's the thing that terrifies me most. I mean, at least in lockdown at the moment, I'm locked down with my kids and my husband, and I know where they are, you know?
Yeah. No, it is strange. I mean, I think about that a lot, especially like you said, she just endures that insane wake. But this idea of like seeing a body and having closure, right? That's what we've kind of been doing forever across everything, right? Is there some sense of closure among the loss, right? But yeah, the idea of something missing is like so strange and heart-wrenching in a lot of ways. And I think it really drives the novel in a lot of ways too. And you said something interesting, and one of the things I love about Magella is like she still gets up every day living in this like political unrest, living with these like insane people, living during the Troubles, and like literally not knowing how this is all going to go and turn out. And you know, and she never messes up at work. She serves the best food. She's good at what she does. You know, she's just like, she still has to go to work. She's, you know, and I actually think that's a really interesting thing now in terms of resilience, and just what she is, a completely resilient person, even if she often thinks she's not. But this idea, you know, of like now we're in this pandemic and people are working from home, but a lot of people, most people are still having to get up and
just crack on with it.
Yeah, you gotta, and I wonder, you know, what would Magella be like now during this happening now?
You see, I think Magella's life would largely not change, right? I think of lockdown rules here. They run a takeaway. It's not a restaurant, so people can come. They can order food. They can come pick it up. Magella doesn't. I suppose what she would lose is her. They've closed what they call the wet pubs, which is a terrible, terrible name for a pub, just basically that sells alcohol and nothing else.
Love it.
But if they've closed the wet pubs, it means she can't go to the pub and get drunk. I mean, she likes her 8 pints a week, you know. She sits down, she does that, and she might have sex, she might not, depending on who's in the pub. But it is a kind of like a sense of like she just lets go that night, you know. She gets in, she has her drinks, maybe she gets somebody, maybe she doesn't, she has a Chinese and she goes home. So she wouldn't have that. But I do remember that, you know, I mean, I grew up in the Troubles, and one of the things that was kind of different for me compared to my parents was my parents grew up before the Troubles, and they saw it kick off, and they saw it going from political unrest and people agitating for civil rights, people asking for, you know, Catholics demanding the same rights as Protestants, and people asking for basic, you know, good housing, education, and things like that. And they saw that go from protests and demonstrations to out and out violence, which, you know, isn't something so terribly far from what's happening in the United States at the moment. Like we had a parliament that was run by people who were a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people. It was, and that was torn apart, you know, over the next few years. And we then had to have direct rule from London, and I think from my parents, they always had this sense of the world that had been, where they got to go to college. Like they were the first people in their families who went to university. They got jobs. They were able to get a mortgage. They were able to buy cars, for God's sake. And then I grew up in this thing where I was like, oh, but there's just always been bombs. There's just always been shooting. It was like, to be honest, for a long time as a teenager and as a young person, I didn't really see the point in peace. I did, because the only thing I'd known was this unrest. I wasn't sitting there marching for peace the way they'd done in the mid 70s. I was like just keeping my head down, trying to get my exam results, and then I was going to leave.
Right.
So when the pandemic kicked off, and I can remember everybody having this like pandemic energy, and everybody. I mean, clearly people were dying and people were being sick and people were having a tough time, but a lot of people were focusing energy, like you're saying, your husband on the running. My husband stress bakes. There was a lot of cinnamon buns. Yeah, he stress bakes. He's French.
Okay.
I was pretty burnt out because I just launched my book in UK and Ireland, and I was like, what am I going to do here? Because we'd been tracking the virus for a while, me and my husband. Like we really felt like we were racing against the clock to get the book out.
Yeah.
And even when we went to London, I mean, nobody was really paying attention at this point. We went to London and we weren't doing public transport. We were trying to keep our kids like close to us. We were really feeling it. This is around about the 20th of February. And so then we locked down before the schools closed, before the government did. We were like, okay, let's just get out of it. I have underlying health conditions. I would be wiped by COVID. And but I can remember thinking, this is not going to burn out fast. And the energy I need for this is more like Troubles energy, like that ability to get up every morning and to step out the door and to keep going and to help everybody else keep going and keep this steady head. And I think that was kind of useful. That and doing a happiness course. I enjoyed my happiness course. Was brilliant because if you like, I think of Evie, right, in your book, and I think of Magella in my book. I don't think anyone ever sat them down once in their lives and said, did you know you can choose happiness? Did you know? Did you know if you're happy, everyone else around you is happier? So like, I'm 45 and I did this happiness course and I was like happiness evangelist, but it makes sense that you might want to, like, my kids learn about resilience, my kids learn about grit, my kids have gone into a pandemic and their school completely, the school just really supported. The school was like, happiness first, mental health first, second, you can catch up on books. We're here to just make sure everybody feels okay. What do we need to talk about? Maybe we'll not do work today. They had a really amazing focus on mental health that I think that we certainly didn't have in Ireland. We didn't have it in the north,
Of course. Yeah, I love that word grit. I certainly think too, like, so I think if, of course in America, it's a little different, but I do think, like personally, I grew up in poverty and have just like constantly faced adversity and have always kind of known that the government was really not going to help me. And I'm all for a small incremental change, but like, there's only so much, once you see so much that you're not really relying anymore on this sort of like mass thing to come help you and save you. And I think, so anyone who's faced not only adversity, but like toughly marginalized communities in America, Black people, people of color, immigrants, all of these things, like, I think that the expectation and perception of what's happening is quite different from the groups of people who think this is like a totally unfathomable thing that is just rocking their world. And I have, and for very good reason, and lucky for them, actually, in a lot of ways. And I've certainly seen a lot of friends who are going through this, like, it's almost like their first time of collective mourning and collective grief.
Yeah.
And honestly, I could write a whole book on collective grief, especially in America. It's like on social media too. It just like drives me insane in a lot of ways, like the layers of responses and things. But yeah, I certainly think that there's a wide range of response here because we are so big and there are so many problems here. And this is like, there are people I'm finding who are like, hey man, the system's really messed up. And there's like, this is showing all the cracks. And it's like, yeah, dude, we've been telling you this for like our
years,
for our whole lives. Like, it's really bad. Like the fact that people don't expect that. But I do think that, growing up in the Troubles or growing up in any sort of marginalized way, you're kind of resilient. You have to be. There's just no other choice because you have to get up and go the fuck to work, and you have to provide food for your family and take care of your kids or your parents or like whatever. It's still a thing you have to do every day. So I do certainly.
But then I do worry too, because I know people who didn't make it through, right? You know that as well. You know the people who actually one morning it was too much and they take all the pills, or the people who drive their car into the loch, or the people who like, I mean, there is a great deal of talk about grit and resilience that worries me at the moment, because are we basing our assumptions on grit and resilience around the people who survived? And I know there's this great saying years ago that the RAF used to, when in the Second World War, the planes would go out, and then when the planes that made it back, you know, they would look at them and go, oh my God, look, there's all these bullet holes here. We need to reinforce all these areas. And then this one mechanic was like, well, maybe we need to reinforce the areas that don't have bullet holes, because that's probably what's getting shot, and they're the planes that are not coming back. And sometimes I wonder, are we doing this with grit and resilience? We're like, look at this person, she experienced X, Y, and Z, and now she's still, and I'm going, well, just wouldn't it be great if we weren't experiencing things like this? And I do wonder what everything would look like if everybody had that kind of lovely experience, right? That one where they're kind of shocked to see the cracks in the system instead of clawing their way out of it, you know?
Yeah, like white knuckling it through. I love what you just said though, about how the schools were like, hey, is everybody okay? I have friends all over the country with kids, and they're all homeschooling, you know, all the thing you're doing now too. And it's so crazy to hear sort of the varied responses of how that's not necessarily happening. That sort of empathetic, kind of kind way of thinking about things. And I certainly think, you know, that idea of resilience, it gets muddled with the idea of like, just suck it up and do your best and survive. But like, then who are you? Like asking what happiness is when you're in your 40s. Like, what are you know, like that's unfair. It's so many ways. Like,
I think it's interesting. I mean, I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old who actually will turn around and say to me, you're stressing out right now. These are problems, but they don't need to make you angry. And we think maybe you need to go and sit down or take a walk outside. And I'm like going, am I the toddler in the room? And I think that Magella is in this position, right? And Evie is too, where they have these infant toddler parents, basically, right? So, you know, Magella's got this alcoholic mom. Her dad, her rocks disappeared, and Magella's got this alcoholic mom who clearly has had a tough time, right? She's not had it easy herself. She's never been parented. She hasn't learned to parent, and she's not particularly interested in learning to parent, to be honest. And Magella's kind of doing what her dad did, you know, shoring her mom up and, you know, making sure she hasn't just enough alcohol and just enough pills. And, you know, has she eaten anything today other than that yogurt? And she kind of just sort of parents her mom. And, you know, I'm interested in the kind of, you know, what's the decision there? Why hasn't she just left? You know, why is she still there? And is this just that kind of thing? This is my mom. This is my blood. She doesn't have very many people left in her life.
Yeah, that is I mean, that's a real life thing I struggle with too. It's like, you know, most of my life has been formed by like chosen family and friends, like the closest people to me. I have a best friend I've known since I was 5, and we talk every day. And it's been so hard for us in the pandemic not to just be able to get totally shit-faced together and like karaoke in her apartment, which is like how we deal with things.
Processing.
Yeah, processing, exactly. But yeah, I think it is isn't that an interesting thing? It's actually in both of our books, this draw to go back and to be with your, you know, your literal family, your blood family. I think about that all the time. Like, is that, and we don't really know, but like, is that like a biological thing? Because once you hit a certain age, right, you don't really need your family. You don't need your mother or your father or whatever. But yet, you know, there's always this weird sort of longing and this idea of like wanting to patch up those relationships or make them good. And I think actually
it's really hard.
It's really hard. Magella and Evie in my book too. Like, I think that's kind of one of the most heartbreaking things, because as a reader, even thinking about my own book, but reading your book, I'm like, dude, just get out of there. Like, you don't have to do this. But I also fully understand and relate to the idea that like she doesn't leave.
she doesn't leave. And I was really, when I was writing the book, that was really important, right? Because there's tons of literature about the people who grow up in a small town and they're dying to leave and they want to leave. And the only thing that the whole ambition is to leave. Or the other one is where a small town girl moves to big city and then realizes her heart is in the small town. But Magella really doesn't see anything except this town. And I wonder, though, is this the thing you have? I remember, okay, really just really basic one. When one of our cats disappeared, I didn't want to go on holiday or visit people because what if the cat came back what if she just turned up for her milk and I wasn't there and then she was never going to come back again? And like, I mean, if your dad's disappeared and you really don't know where he is, then maybe a huge part of her is like, well, I'm either in the house or the chipper. I'm in the house or the chipper. And she goes to that, and then she goes to the wake. Now I to be honest, I love wakes. I think wakes are an amazing way of meeting people and having collective grief on a small, intimate scale, if you know what I mean. It's like where you might have 50 people come to your wake, you might have hundreds of people come, but what you have is person after person coming through and expressing their solidarity with you in your moment of grief. But Magella's at this wake and she daren't leave. I mean, if your dad is going to show up, if her dad is going to show up, if her mom died, she's not sure he'd show up, but it's his mommy's dead, and she believes he's going to turn up. Right up until the point where she carries the coffin out, she believes he's going to turn up, and that's a kind of heartbreaking thing. I think that you've got this absence that you're filling with your imagination and you're filling with your desires, and then she's got this actual living parent that she just can't get any distance from. Like her mom is just there all the time.
Right. I think too a good word is just feeling trapped, right? Like she is so like, on the surface, right? She's trapped by this small town. She has to help her family and she wants her dad to come back. But I think that idea of being emotionally trapped in this setting, which was something we, I think, talked about last time too, but my book, Edie's on an island. So like, again, on the surface, it's like this little town, this little beach town, but the idea of being just surrounded by water, or in your case, like sort of a rural place, or also politically, right? There are only so many.
Yeah, and we also had the border, like like actually being surrounded by a border and to some extent military and stuff. So there's this almost like an atmosphere boxing you in.
Yeah, I think people are, that's what I was saying in the beginning too, that this book, in a strange way, is actually, I think a lot of Americans should read this, because that feeling, I think, is new for a lot of people here, of feeling like I mean, by the way, we can go wherever you want, you can get on a plane, do whatever the fuck you want. It's a whole nightmare here. But still, there is, for the majority of us who are trying to like not let other people die in vain,
there's threat all around.
Yeah, you can't, you particularly like don't want to go out of your county. Like there are actually ideas in place. They're just not being enforced in any way. So there are rules that, we're sort of following or hoping people are following. But yeah, this idea of feeling so trapped. And then I think it works so well in this book too, because again, there's the physical part of it that is actually happening based on, the troubles and real things that happen that affect people to this day, every day.
Yeah.
But then emotionally, right? Like when she's home or when she's at the chip shop, I mean, you feel it. You did such a good job with that. Like it just feels like this weight sort of closing in, and her sort of dealing with everything, with one, humor, which is, by the way, I don't know how this book would go without humor, because it would probably be really hard to, but it's so funny. And it's almost refreshing to see that sort of perspective in this like world that's literally coming down.
I think like humor was a big coping mechanism when I was growing up. I mean, like there were two sides to humor. Like we had this really traditional sort of, like my grandmother was the matriarch on my dad's side, and her family were big Shanachies, and a Shanachie is like a storyteller. So you would like go up to see my grandmother once a week, and daddy would drive us up, and there'd be the six of us kids and my mom, and the TV would go off, and then so everybody would have some tea and they'd talk about the right here right now gossip and scandal, and then somebody would say, do you mind the time John Joe went up the field to get the cow? And And then the story would kick off and you'd be like, you'd remember, right, here's the big, you knew that story, right? You knew the story backwards, you knew it forwards, you knew it sideways. You'd heard it 100 times before. But then the story, there'd be some wee detail in the story that nobody'd ever said before, some little thing. So you always had to listen, because just in case somebody would say something and you'd be, oh my God, now I've learned something new about the time that John Joe went up the field to get the cow. And these stories were really quite funny, right? Because for anything to be passed along orally, it needs to be funny and visual and to have great characters and a really good storyline. But then also you would get these really incredibly sad stories. My dad lost one of his sisters when she was like a baby, and this was not a story that was told all the time, but it would be told, and the sense of loss around this little sister who died, and how my dad was sent to get the doctor, and how the doctor came but he was drunk, and how they thought if they held the lamp closer to my aunt that the light would help her live. You would have that after you would have heard about John Joe and the cow. And this idea of kind of sadness and grief and darkness, and then the humor has always sat with me. And I do think that humor was used as a coping mechanism during the Troubles. It was kind of like when everything was just, when you couldn't really compute. It's like Magella thinking about your man's legs because she doesn't want to consider, like, this is a dead person in front of me, and this is as a result of a political, she's not going there. She's just, what about the legs then? It's funny and it's weird and it's bizarre, and it keeps you from losing it. I'm quite interested because like I had relatives who emigrated from Ireland during the Troubles. They had to go, and they made a new life for themselves in America, because America was the place you went to escape. It was this shining light. It was this place where you could come to. And, they'd work really hard to make great, really good lives for themselves. And all the time feeling the sense of loss of the country they left, like loads of immigrants do this. And then I'm like going, and then you have this pandemic and you have political unrest and stuff. And I do wonder, because America is a sort of nation built of people who've come in from other countries, and it's a nation that has a really complicated history. And I wonder what it feels like to be someone who feels they escaped something to make this life in a different, better place. And things are really tough now again, or they seem tough to me. And I know my family are going through a tough time in the States. This is not easy for people.
I think it's interesting you just said that, because I hate watching the nightly news because they just repeat themselves. But I am obsessed with car chases, and I have been since I was a kid. It's a very Los Angeles thing. So if I'm bored at night, I will check in to see if there's a car chase. And I was watching the news last night, and they were, it was a previously recorded thing where they were interviewing people that were lining up to get at Dodger Stadium here at our baseball field. They have half of it now is vaccines and the other half is like COVID testing. And it's a total mess, horrible, whatever. And so then you have the news with their like 6 foot long stick and microphone, and the woman was interviewing all sorts of people, just asking them, like, I didn't even know the point of the interview, just like asking them like how they feel. I don't know, it's very strange about like going to Dodger Stadium to get either vaccinated or tested. You're either maybe going to die or now you're about to live. It's very strange.
Yeah.
And she interviewed multiple people, and 2 of them were immigrants. And both said, I came here because my life was going to be better here. And one of the guys was like, I still believe that. This is, my life has been better since I've been here, and things are always hard. Things are going to be, just exactly what we were saying. He knew, wherever he was from, he knew that like shit gets bad sometimes, and he was ready to weather the storm. The other guy was just kind of like, my family is now separated and dispersed. I don't know what I should do now. And I was just thinking, like, how is this like an 11 o'clock news broadcast? Like, this is so loaded on so many levels of just casually talking to these guys at Dodger Stadium. And yeah, I certainly think, of course, there are many perspectives on that. And a lot of immigrant families I know. Also, it depends on where you immigrated from, right? Because also, it's a crazy racist place we live. And I know a lot of people who, are either becoming citizens or not legally citizens. And that's just a totally different vibe for all of this, right? Not only are you worried about getting COVID and dying, but you're also worried about being deported from your children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the same thing in Ireland, and in Ireland, like, I mean, my book focuses on the north and on the troubles, but we've had a week in which, you know, we had a report on the mother and baby homes, which were homes run by nuns for women and girls, a lot of girls, children really, who were pregnant, and the nuns would take them in and yeah, they would have their babies, supposedly have their babies in a safe environment, and the babies would then usually be adopted out. But, you know, there was an investigation into the mother and baby homes, which came about from a grassroots level. The women who were in the homes, or children who were looking for their mothers who disappeared in the homes, wanted an investigation, and they discovered mortality rates of up to 86% in these maternity homes run by nuns. So people were looking at that in Ireland. You know, you're looking at that, and then we have the highest, I mean, I think we still have the highest COVID rate in the world after being the lowest in Europe. And yeah, there's this kind of, things feel really, I suppose in one way, right, I think it's really amazing that we are interrogating our history, right? We are interrogating our history. We're interrogating, how did it turn out in this country where we claim to care for children, that nuns ran homes for profit. These were profit-making centers where children died in their thousands and thousands of children died. Others were forced adopted out to whoever wanted them, you know. But this interrogation of your history is kind of important as well. Like Magella in my book has a really strong sense of her history. She knows that, well, she knows her uncle was involved in the IRA. I mean, he blew himself up with a bomb. It's kind of obvious. So she's pretty sure about him. Her granddad, she knows, was involved in something, and he was interned as well. He was involved in the border campaign. She has a sense of history and political struggle that goes right back to partition. You know, she's very aware that her family have been involved in struggles in one way or another for a long time. But I think the idea of interrogating that is really important. You know, what does it mean to say that your family are this type of person, or that your family believe in this? Or, you know, do you stick to the beliefs your parents had about something? Do you stick to your beliefs that your grandparents had? You know, like, at what point do you say, well, actually, we've been doing this for years, for centuries, and it's not working out? You know, maybe we could change the record and do things differently. And it is, I'm in, because I sit in this space where I'm, you know, I was brought up in Northern Ireland, which is ruled by the British, which is claimed by the Irish, and it is a contested space. And so you have Britain and Brexit and food shortages, and Britain carrying on with this really triumphalist sort of, you know, making Britain great again. That kind of narrative of you know, it's almost like there's not the sense of self-interrogation you need to actually say, hey, look, we made a mistake here, or this isn't working out, how can we make things better? But there is a sense of that in the Republic of Ireland, maybe not as much as I would like to see, but people looking at things like the Catholic Church, looking at things like Mother and Baby Home, looking at things even about how we founded our state. Like, the Republic of Ireland was founded in violence, and I think that has still got a strong sort of culture of violence, or not, it's not, they romanticize it, you know. And yeah, I'm sometimes really glad it's hard to get guns in Ireland.
Yes, I agree. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, I think it is such a weird time, especially to be, and an important time to be reading books and talking about this kind of stuff. I always wonder personally, and recently something I've been trying to do, I keep saying that I've gone, now that I'm getting older, that I've gone from being an atheist to being maybe agnostic, and then maybe that means I'm more hopeful. And I used to be, you know, all about anarchy growing up, and now I'm like, okay, you know, incremental change can work. Like, I love my congresswoman here. Like, there are things that are actually happening, and it's important for me to have that kind of hope, because otherwise, like, but I one of the things I was thinking about is kind of what you said, is like, it is great that we're interrogating our history, but then I wonder, am I only, because of what I see on social media, or because of who I talk to, I'm seeing other people that feel the same way I do, we're doing the work in our own communities. We're, you know, but then like, what about all the other people, or particularly the 70 million people that voted for Donald Trump in our country? Do what are they interrogating? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's a very weird thing to try to be really hyper aware of. Because, right, my own community, my own friends, like I'm seeing all this change, you know, locally and with people I know, and personally talking to, you know, older family members who are racist, right?
Yeah.
But then like on a larger level, I sometimes lose hope because I'm like, oh my God, like, how is this going to be enough? You know, it's just a really weird thing. And I think that word resilience comes to me because you're right. You can be resilient and get up and go to work and do your thing. But, you know, when does it matter? It's a rough time, I think, everywhere, certainly.
I think we do matter, and I think that every small thing you do matters, every small goodness you do. Like, I know in my book, Magella as kind of, the little guy doesn't know it, but she's adopted him, this little guy called Iggy, who is he's in an abusive family, and like she just keeps a wee eye out for him, you know, she feeds him, and then she puts money in the till, and she gets him to run errands for her, and she's like, if this is the only thing that Magella can do, the only difference she can make in her town, you know, then
I love that.
like what she's doing is she's got this little guy, she feeds him every day if she can. And you know, she's never going to call the social workers and report his family, because you don't do that. She's never actually going to rescue him.
Right.
But you got to look at where she's coming from, you know, where are you coming from? What is your background? And what she does within her own abilities is kind. And I'm really interested in things like the education system, because I grew up in Northern Ireland. It was segregated education. Catholics went here, Protestants went there. You had the same curriculum-ish, but how it was taught was different. And so you came out with very different views. And then, of course, there's all these gaps in the curriculum that you can fill with, you know, prejudice and sectarianism. And my sons, when we moved from London with my kids, and it was absolutely horrifying for me and my husband to realize that most schools in Ireland are Catholic. Like we kind of knew Northern Ireland was going to be still dealing with, you know, legacy conflict and everything. But when we got down south and we were like, but hang on, you guys, didn't you kind of get independence around 1924 or something, or 22? And yet, when I say, can I apply to your school? The first question, the literal first question is not, what's your kid's name? You know, it was, can we see the baptismal certificate of your child? I'm going, we don't have one. And they'll say, oh, a photocopy will do. I go, no, we don't have one because we didn't our children are unbaptized. And then we realized pretty quickly that meant that our ability to get into a school was suddenly, so basically they were allowed to, at the time they were allowed to prioritize Catholics, which meant that my, you know, Catholic, Muslim, French, Moroccan, Anglo-Irish kids were just like getting, you are number 1063 in our, you know, application for a 30-place child or 30-place class. And we were like, wow. But they have these schools in the Republic of Ireland called Educate Together. I mean, so Educate Together is a non-denominational education where religion doesn't come into it. And when it does come into it, it comes into it from the point of view that, oh, this week we're going to learn about Muslims. Oh, next week we're going to learn about Jews. And this week we might learn about what Christians, not Catholics and Protestants, what Christians think. And they focus so much more on teaching kids how to, like, wellness and letting the kids learn songs and giving the kids the chance to, you know, investigate things right across the world. And they really work hard. I mean, it's quite it's Dublin, so it's not the most international school in the world, but there are a lot of kids from different countries who are different colors, who speak different languages. And for me, this is just so important. And I think that's going to help them be different humans and be better equipped than me, because sometimes I just get really exhausted and really terrified. And I feel like I'm a bit like Magella, just sort of buying a meal for somebody and making this small change, because really I don't know how to cope with making bigger changes, because I'm quite tired quite a lot of the time and terrified sometimes.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a really common feeling right now all over. I do want to open this up for questions, and I almost said an answers. Duh, we would be the answers. See, I'm tired.
I don't mind if somebody has some answers for me. I
Yeah,
would really
please
appreciate
put
some
your
answers.
answers. Yeah, if you have answers for us.
Actually, yes. If you've any therapy or any coping mechanisms or happiness courses or
Oh, can you while if people want to put some questions in, we're happy to answer them. You could just put them in the little Q&A box. But I would like to hear, like, on a happier note. Can you talk a little bit about this happiness course? Where can I take it, and what is it?
It's good. Well, of course, me being me, which is obsessive, I did 2 happiness courses, not 1. I was told, my therapist said, why don't you do a happiness? No, she actually said, Michelle, I can help you, but it's going to take ages. And really, you need to do a happiness course. And I was like, she goes, and as a therapist, I'm not really supposed to teach you happiness, but really, I think you need to learn happiness. So she shared a course with me, and I can't for the life of me remember who the academic person was who did it, but basically it was all built off the same research, and I did the Yale one as well. So Yale has got the free happiness course, but what I found was I was so resistant to the idea of happiness that I needed to do the Yale one and sit through it. And then the other one was hour-long recordings of a kind of workshop-y happiness thing of people who seemed really inordinately happy to me, but wanted to be even happier. But it was kind of like I did the Yale one, and then this other course, I backed it up as a kind of revision class. And I really did try to do the exercises the Yale one has, and to do some reading around it, because I grew up, I was one of 6 kids, and we were all born inside 8 years, so you're talking about, yeah, no, sort of like 1974, Una, 1975, Michelle, 1976, Christine, it just went like that. And my mom was a teacher, and she worked, and we can talk, like, I am often interested in the idea of being mothered, or how your parents influence, and I feel like you can never get enough of your parents. And in part, I used to think that's because I was one of 6, and there was no time, right? Like you were literally kicked out of the cot because somebody else had come along, and you needed, there was always somebody waiting to take what you had, sort of a thing. And I loved growing up in it with lots of siblings. I absolutely loved it. But there's always this feeling like you never, like you had to fight to get 2 minutes of your mom's time, literally 2 minutes of your mom's time. Like if my dad had to pick me up, from the town, and I had to have 5 minutes with my dad in the car on my own, this would be like just the biggest thing. Wow. But there was an interesting thing. I look at how happiness wasn't prioritized, survival was, and eating and sleeping and making sure you'd clothes. Happiness and emotions, and the idea that you would put yourself first is just not going to happen. And then I became a mother myself, and it's something Magella does in her book. She has this little sort of daydream about what would it be like if she, had kids, and what would happen. She was like, she's 27. She's thinking she'd need to get going soon if she was to have pop them out, sort of a thing. But there was a thing I read recently was, for raising happy kids, is you have to parent yourself first, which for me was a really strange idea, because I'm like, I'm parenting them. I'm parenting the fuck out of my children. But when you sit back and you realize, when it's hard, when I'm stressed and when I'm losing my temper, this idea that actually you need to parent yourself in that moment. And if you're not able to kind of parent yourself and meet whatever need inside you needs to be met, and I'm not necessarily talking about going from ready to scream to happiness, but just even taking a second just to take this focus and look at yourself and think, well, what do you want? And can I give it to you? Can I give it to you? Maybe it's just a cup of tea outside. Right. It's a cup of tea outside. Let's close the door on the children. So yeah, look, I'm sure this sounds really odd to the people in the audience, because they probably are all much better at emotional stuff. But like for me, it's just such. No, it's such a revelation to me. It's like people have written books about happiness. And people have written like there's playbooks on how to be happy. There's like I
Yeah.
know self-care is a bit overdone, but on the other side for me, like I'd never done self-care
Yeah.
ever. I'd done the thing where you kind of go to a bar and get really drunk and then you keep drinking and then you don't actually remember why you woke up on the side of the road and you're like a little bit, okay, was it a good night? Let's just pretend it was a good night. But the idea of sitting down and I mean, I during the early pandemic last year, I realized that having a hot bath was really helpful when I was feeling really stressed. And like we couldn't go anywhere, 2K lockdown. But I felt so self-conscious about running the bath, hot bath, and lighting a Kindle and getting into it. And then also because we only have one toilet in our house, it's
Oh,
like,
right. So it's like just,
yeah,
yeah, that's stressful.
it's like this really just felt it took me so long to get over all that before I could enjoy being in a hot bath. And I think about Magella, and sometimes I'm like, there are all these things I'd love to do. Like I'd love to take Magella to like a hotel with a big bath, not these crappy wee baths, right? But a big bath that she can fit into and put her in a bubble bath and let her just sit there because I think she'd like it.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
totally.
she'd love to be at the beach. I mean, she's been to the beach once in her life, right? And her man, yeah, it was disastrous. But wouldn't she? I think she wouldn't mind going to the beach or even somewhere like Torremolinos and having a few cheap beer, maybe a cocktail.
Yeah,
Has she ever
fancy
had a
cocktail.
cocktail?
Right.
Fancy cocktail. She'd probably throw the umbrella out, but it's just like I think one of the things about Magellas is that like I think she actually does really appreciate the things she has that's good in her life. Like when she buys herself a new duvet. This is no plot spoiler. She buys a new duvet, and oh my God, has anyone ever loved a duvet as hard as Magella? Nobody has loved a duvet as hard as Magella, and I love this idea that she has things for all that she is not very much. She really appreciates the hell out of the stuff she does have.
I mean, I think that's so key, I think, to being happy and enjoying, like you're saying, sort of small things that, it sounds so cheesy, but like if you can enjoy even small things like a bath, to some people that's a really small thing, but to you it's such a big thing and it makes
Oh,
sense
it's a big
why.
deal.
Yeah, no, I feel you on all of that for sure. My therapist, the last year we were talking and I said, I don't even like know what I like to do. And she's like, yes, you do. I'm like, no, I don't even know if I've thought about that. Like I just do whatever. And I've never thought about, things I like and don't like. And she told me I'd been going to all these yoga classes. And I actually do like yoga, but I don't like going in person because I hate touching
No.
other people and it
Yeah.
smells. She's like, you
Yeah.
don't have to like in-person yoga. And that one sentence was like, I don't have to, I totally know what you're saying. I think everyone right now should take the happiness course. My mom took the Yale happiness course. I don't know if it worked and I don't know if she followed all the way through, but she also had a lot of sort of new insights about, I think, being kinder to herself, which was a very new concept for her. And that's something I have to work on as well. It's really hard, I think, for everybody, but to be kind to yourself,
I think that kind of trickles down because it's interesting too what trickles down in your family and like in my own family. My one of my grandfathers was born in Philadelphia, and his parents were Irish immigrants who'd left Ireland. Some of the children were Irish. They moved to America, and he was born in Philadelphia. And his mum watched all her children die, and her husband died in the flu pandemic. And when she was down to just one kid, she was like, fuck this, I'm going back. And she took the boat back to Ireland, which is a hard trip, right? And she was taken in by priests and acted as housekeeper, and he was raised in a house full of priests. Um, and then he grew up to be a complete hell raiser. So I wouldn't advise letting priests raise your children. And then my other grandfather, my maternal grandfather he was a British soldier, and in the Second World War, he got sent in to Dunkirk. And Dunkirk, I don't know if you know, but the Dunkirk operation was where the British Army largely was stranded on the beach at Dunkirk. And you're talking hundreds of thousands of British men under heavy German fire. And it's quite a kind of big myth, or sort of a big important thing in British history, because essentially if they didn't get the army off the beach, then the war was lost. And so everybody's very familiar with the idea that the boats went over and the boats took the soldiers back. But actually, there were battalions sent in, like my grandfather's battalion, who were sent in as cannon fodder to hold the Germans back. And my grandfather jumped off a boat, and he said he'd shot his ammo off before he even hit the beach, you know. And so his first job was scavenging for ammo from dead people. And of course, you know, the Germans got him really, really fast and then marched him to Poland, and he spent 5 years in a prisoner of war camp.
Wow.
And so he came out of that. Well, he escaped the prisoner of war camp. Long story short, he made it back to Ireland. And, you know, he'd married my grandmother, and inside a year they had my mother. And I'm like going, when I think of the sort of parenting influences I have, like I was raised by a woman who was raised by a man who survived a prisoner of war camp, and the skills that kept him alive are the ones that he impressed upon my mum. I mean, like my grandfather on the other side, I mean, I can't imagine what he would have felt leaving this American town. And he was a little American boy, and he got taken back to Ireland and was raised in a house full of priests. So all these different ways in which you haven't been parented, or your parents weren't parented, or their parents weren't parented, I think they mount up. So kindness sounds like so paltry when you put it up against all that, but God, it's better than, you know, unkindness or a whole lot too much drinking as well. I think that's also not the best strategy.
I absolutely relate to that. We have a question that actually kind of ties into all of this from Justin. It says, maybe it's just a coincidence, but Big Girl, Small Town, Dairy Girls, The Crown. It seems like I've been thinking a lot about the Troubles, a period of history I don't know much about. Do you think there's a reason why this period is being depicted at this moment? That's true. It is very like topical, it seems.
I think, I mean, like I've wondered about it, but then I was looking back at the Second World War, and it's about, I think that there's a certain amount of time between, I mean, if you think that the ceasefire was 1994, you know, and how long ago that was, I mean, in my head, I feel that I spent my 20s kind of being, not all my 20s, up to maybe my mid-20s, being prepared to talk about it and being prepared to describe the things that had happened, and being prepared to enter it, having the energy to enter into conversations with people. Then what happened was, when I was writing about this stuff, like in my very early 30s, nobody in publishing or television was interested in this, because they'd all had enough. And they'd all seen the news footage, and it was all very fresh in their heads and stuff. I think where we're at now as a stage in history, we've just got enough space from it where people can still say, oh, that would have happened to my mother, or my aunt would remember. So there's this feeling that it's still living history, but it's actually not just upfront and in your face. Like the news stories are historical news stories on the whole. And I think that's why. And to be honest, I feel like time is running out for getting the stories of my dad's generation from these people who did incredible things and tried to do incredible things and tried to do peaceful things. And John Hume died last year. That generation of people have been through a lot of trauma, are dying off. And I would love for us not just to be looking at stories like Big Girl, Small Town and Dairy Girls. I would love to get these people who were there when it all kicked off. We're not getting those stories through.
I think, it is the right time, and I'm happy all this is sort of coming up, especially for me, because it's something that I had only sort of like vaguely heard about, but now to have sort of these, you know, narratives and stuff. If, you know, everybody out there, this book is so good. And even though we're talking about really serious things, and it actually is about a lot of kind of just regular insane life things, grief, you know, trying to just figure out who you are, but also does touch on all these things that we've kind of been talking about. It's a fantastic book, and I'm so happy for you. I'm happy that we have it finally here. So everybody
and this is where I should be holding up your book. If I was back in Dublin, I would have.
I hope our publicists start watching this. I don't even know where a copy of my book is, because I just moved. So I I feel like I don't want to show you the rest of the room. It's a mess, but
Oh, there,
There it
yay.
is.
Thank you.
Anyway, but this has been really great.
Yeah.
Always so nice to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours, but I won't.
Yeah, we really
everyone.
need to, we really need to meet up in real life. And
Someday.
yeah, I probably curse more in real life.
Same.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. I'm so pleased to have heard you both. You're a delight and truly insightful, and I really appreciate your time and the energy you have expanded sharing now. And I really do think like it's such a special ability to be able to connect across continents. That's maybe one thing that this pandemic has given us is given us room to connect this way, and I'm glad to reap the benefits of it this afternoon. So thank you both. Thank you, Michelle. It was such a pleasure meeting you. Crissy, so good to see you again. And here, give the audience one last look
at those. Listen, thank you so much. And Crissy, we'll have beers sometime, right? And I'll be over in the bookstore when I'm in San Francisco next as well. Like,
please do.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Good night.
Good night.